Under the banner of TKO Boxing, Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh are trying to change the sport forever. But will it work or will it crash and burn? Recently, the pay structure was revealed. In this video, I'm going to analyze all the things around this article that detail the inner workings of the league, and I speculate on how it might evolve and whether or not I think it can be a success. Hello everyone, and welcome back to A Guy Called Henry. Guys, today we have to talk about TKO Boxing in some detail because I've touched on it a little bit. I've done a couple of live videos where I've talked about this. I was a couple of days ago when the article was released, when Turkey came out and said that it was a load of rubbish and the journalist who wrote it needs to check his information. I did a live video about it, but I hadn't actually had the time to sit down and really properly assess this, almost as if I'm getting stuck into some kind of research project. But I've now properly sat down and assessed the article, and I've looked at what it might mean. I've also gone and looked at the UFC model to try and speculate on where it's different and how I think that this might lead into following that model even further. Because to be honest, it's looking extremely similar. But we've actually been given some details in here. And whilst Turkey's come out and said they're not real, it does seem pretty accurate. I think most people are taking this as gospel. Most people are taking this as this really is the leaked structure. And so I'm going to move forward assuming in this video that this really is how it's going to be done. And I'm going to really sit and try and think about the lengths to which I think this is going to resemble the UFC model. And of course, I'm going to try and answer the question, is this going to work? Because I can tell you right now, I can see some big strengths to this, but I can also see exactly how this is going to fail and why there's a very good chance that it will. So is this league a terrible idea? Is it doomed to fail? I'm going to get into that as we go through this video. Before I do, guys, don't forget to bang a like on this video. If you do indeed enjoy the content here, please do like it because, you know, a lot of time and effort goes into it. And if you could just do that small favor and hit that like button, it goes a long way to helping to push the channel out there. The more of you like the video that they're watching, the better it helps. Please subscribe if you're new around here, or if indeed you've been watching for a while and you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, I do appreciate it. And finally, get your comments in the comments section below. Do you think this promotion is going to be a success? Because at the end of the day, it's being called a boxing league, but all it really is a self-contained promotion, exactly like what the UFC is. They're just trying to use language that we kind of don't really hear that much in boxing to make it feel like something fresh and new. But at the end of the day, it is exactly what it says it is. You know, it's a new boxing promotion under the guise of a league. I mean, it is a league, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so let's start with the basics. What is TKO? And what exactly are they proposing? So I've got some bullet points I'm going to take you through. So it's a new promotion from Dana White's team under TKO Group Holdings, which is the UFC and WWE parent company. As I understand it, the WWE owner is also involved in this venture, and it's backed by Saudi investment, as we all know at this point, from Turki Al-Sheikh. And it's going to be run through a management company called Hualapai Ventures. The launch is planned for 2026, so it's not there quite yet, but it is coming in the next year. Their goal is to create a centralized league-style boxing model, much like the UFC, to fix what they see as a broken system. And, you know, in this video, we're going to consider the implications of this. Is boxing a broken system, or to what extent is boxing a broken system? We'll talk about that towards the end of the video when I've kind of assessed where I think this will sit in the wild, wild west, the crazy wild, wild west that is the world of boxing. Okay, so the biggest and most revealing part of the article that I read was based on the pay structure that was revealed. And very, very intriguing. It sort of lets you know, how they're going to operate. It lets you know what kind of fights they're going to be able to attract, and it lets you know some of the biggest weaknesses of the model. Because at the end of the day, money talks. Right now, Turki Al-Sheikh has carved a space in boxing for himself purely because the other promoters have been bought and paid for. He has paid the money to get them over to have their events on his soil, to make sure that it's all Riyadh season sponsored. He's basically trying to buy the sport in the short term by getting as many big names out to Saudi Arabia fighting under the Riyadh season banner as possible. Now let's go through this pay model and we'll talk about it. So the pay is based on TKO's internal rankings, not by popularity and not by external belts. This is one of the biggest things we see in the UFC, is the fact that fighters are paid based on the league system. There's fighters that are absolutely ginormous in the UFC who don't make anywhere near what their actual commercial value is. And we will talk about that. That is a significant weakness in this model. And I'll explain why as we work our way through the video. And each fighter is paid per fight, not on a yearly salary. So even if you are locked into a contract, and it's a minimum of a 2-year contract for a fighter on this league, you will only be paid when you actually have your fights. There is also, and to begin with, a $5,000 signing bonus for a fighter. So no matter what position you're in, you will receive a $5,000 signing bonus, which I can imagine is quite appealing to some fighters who are in absolute dire straits. Now, let's begin. So if you are unranked, your pay per fight is $20,000. If you're ranked number 5 to number 10, your pay will be $50,000. Ranked 3 to 4, $125,000. If you're a title challenger, it's $375,000. And if you're a title defender, it's $750,000. Fighters are expected to fight every 5 months, which implies 2 to 3 fights per year, possibly more. And there will only be 8 weight divisions from flyweight to heavyweight. TKO will crown 1 champion per division, and there will be no recognition of the WBA, WBC, IBF, WBO, or the IBO, and indeed the Ring magazine. Because as I understand it, the rankings that will be in this league have nothing to do with the Ring magazine rankings. And so this is a completely separate endeavor from what currently exists in boxing. So let's talk about the strengths of this model, because there are significant strengths of doing things this way. There are definitely reasons that you would want boxing to be structured this way. There's reasons that we've always complained about how many belts there are in boxing, how uncontrolled it is, and the fact that fights don't happen. So this solves a number of those problems. So the first thing is fighters know what they'll earn based on performance and rank, not on selling tickets or chasing sanctioning fees. So this essentially eradicates that issue of the who needs them club. Those fighters that are good and talented, but people won't fight them because they just don't bring the commercial power to the table to draw in the numbers, meaning that the fight isn't worth as much, meaning that the champion, whoever has the belt, isn't getting paid what they want to be paid. Like for example, Eubank Ben, that's never going to happen in this situation because it doesn't mean anything. The value of that fight would mean nothing to Chris Eubank Jr. because he'd get paid exactly the same as if he fought someone in his division, and same thing for Conor Benn. It means that the sport will be more competitive. It's more about being paid by your ability level rather than your personality or the size of your personal fan base. There's also increased fighter activity and guaranteed fight offers that will be on the table, which is obviously a massive update from seeing Terence Crawford fight once a year, for example. Other fighters that fight even less than that. There will be a single title per division, which obviously the biggest thing we talk about in boxing is there's so many damn belts. There's too many belts. I think I saw Fight Disciples talking about the WBC saying there's something like 36 current WBC world champions or something, which is just completely mental. And that argument that boxing isn't broken, that's part of something that feeds into that narrative of boxing being broken. There's too many belts. It's too unclear. It's too difficult for a casual fan to rock up to the sport and say, okay, who's the champion? Who should I follow? It's too difficult. Young fighters get a real platform. And they've said in the article here that it's mostly being targeted towards young prospects at this point. And they're looking to sign 150 plus fighters. And the idea of it is to build young stars from the ground up. So the strength of this is if you are a young fighter and you're looking for financial stability, if you're a young fighter or a lower level fighter, or potentially a mid-level fighter, there's guaranteed paychecks in this. It doesn't matter what pay-per-views do. It doesn't matter what the gate receipts are. If you win, if you rise your ranking, you're guaranteed to get set amounts of money. Your income and your life becomes a lot more predictable. And for sure, when you're a young prospect, a lot of fighters don't make it just because they just need money and they don't have the money to train full-time. Look at Josh Padley, who fought Shakur Stevenson the other day. Full-time electrician before that fight and training at the same time. I used to work with fighters in Scotland Kieran Smith, for example, a great lad who fought for the British title twice. He was working on construction sites and helping to move heavy machinery and stuff in between fights. So it's no way to live. If you're an elite athlete, a professional athlete, you need to be able to train full-time and have all your energy going into the sport. And finally, the model would not be fully dependent on pay-per-view, and you might see stars being built from the ground up rather than relying on that pay-per-view model. I think that because they've got that controlled structure, they'll know exactly what they're going to be making for each event, and it means that once they build the stars, they'll make more profit themselves as a company, and therefore they'll be able to sustain the full model, I suppose. So that is basically what the strengths of this model are, and I think that it's well worth considering if you're a young prospect, that model. I think that's a really strong model. But at the end of the day, it does just depend on what kind of prospect you are. And we'll talk about that as we move here, because now we're going to get into the cons and the risks. So the first and most obvious thing is it caps earnings for top stars in the sport. Your likes of your Canelo Alvarez, your Anthony Joshua, your Terence Crawford, your Tyson Fury, these guys who make absolutely millions and millions and millions per fight, 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars per fight. To tell them you're going to get capped at 750 grand for a title defense is just scandalous. It will never work. It will never, ever work. And you will not see a top fighter signing for this organization at this stage. So they are absolutely targeting a certain target market. There is no way that those guys would ever go and accept that much money per fight. which means that they're going to really have to build from the ground up. They're going to have to start at the bottom, and they're going to have to make it very much a development league. That is what it has to be. And as it stands, it will be a feeder league into the main sport. That is the reality of what that league is. And it's going to be difficult because they're going to need guys with commercial pool to be able to get profitable, to justify paying, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they will on these events. So the other thing to say about this is that the contracts are time-based, not fight-based, or so it seems. There's a couple of things I'll talk about towards the end of this video that are not stipulated that I think are worth mentioning that the UFC model shows. And I think there might be some more details revealed in due course that I think I will speculate on them towards the end of this video, so stick around because I think that this is not all definitive. But right now, as we understand it, contracts are time-based, not fight-based. There's no mention of escape clauses, meaning fighters will get stuck if they outgrow the pay scale. So not only will you not be able to attract stars, if you make stars, you're not going to be able to keep them. That's the biggest issue. That is the biggest issue here. You can see it in the UFC. It happens all the time. Francis Ngannou left because he wasn't getting the money that he wanted to make the big fights at heavyweight, and so he went and had a couple of boxing matches, and got made way more money. It just shows you exactly what's wrong with the model. Conor McGregor has massively outgrown the UFC in terms of his star power. So that's the issue with it. When you get those stars, when you build those stars, what's to stop them just leaving and going and joining what currently exists? And that is why I say this is more than likely, as it stands, going to become a development league. The other thing is, at the minute, as far as we know, they've been said that you'll potentially get a minimum of 3 fights, but is that actually contractually enforceable, or is it we try to present you with that many opportunities as a fighter? Can you make fighters take fights? How does that work? I'm not sure. Basically, it removes another weakness is that it removes a lot of fighter autonomy. You don't have the ability anymore to make the right moves for your career. It becomes very much manager focused, league focused, promoter focused. They have all the control and the power. At the minute, you can be an independent businessman in boxing and maneuver your way through the division. Look at what Canelo's done recently. Everything is about most money for least risk. It does get rid of that. Which is a negative for the fighters, but certainly not for this particular promotional outfit. Although the other promoters probably won't be loving it. At the same time, they might really like it because at the end of the day, if they're just going to operate at the upper end of the sport in the pay-per-view world, and this league is going to grow stars for them and send them ready-made stars that have been paid decent money, kept them going until they got to the point where they could leave, it might actually just be a really good thing for boxing. It might just really benefit boxing. But at the end of the day, we all know that TKO is not going to be in it just to develop fighters, to have them sent away to other fighters. It might work if it was a bit like football, where you have football clubs that are known as development clubs, like a Borussia Dortmund, sign lots of young stars, build them up, sell them for huge profits. If there was a way that you could sign fighters for a transfer fee, then potentially this model makes sense. But as we all know, that's not a thing. Although you can buy fighters out of their contracts. Because all the rankings are internal, you could say this is negative, but it's what it already exists. Because all the rankings are internal, we don't know how they're going to rank fighters. We don't know how they're going to decide who is the best in those rankings. When you're starting from scratch with 150 fighters, very, very difficult to do that. So that's a negative that's always existed. We don't know exactly how the ranking system will work. You'd hope it'd be based on wins and losses, but we don't know that yet. And you see it all the time in boxing where random fighters pop up in the top 10 of random divisions so that those sanctioning bodies can take more sanctioning fees for a bigger name being in their fights. So what does this mean in the context of boxing's current structure? How do I think this is going to impact the rest of boxing? Well, I think right now, as has been the reaction, I look at the likes of Eddie Hearn, the way they've reacted. They've sort of said that they don't really see it as something that top stars will be interested in. So currently, at this moment in time, I don't think it will really matter too much unless they adapt that pay structure. Right now, it's definitely a development league. They might get those fighters in early, but if they're just going to be 2-year contracts, then there's not too much to worry about, right? You do your 2 years with TKO, you fight your fights, and then you move on to the big leagues in essence. But there's a couple of things that I'm very worried about. A couple of things that haven't been spoken about, that haven't been declared in this article, that we're still waiting to get clarification on. And those things are this. I want you to imagine a situation where, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, TKO really grows an organization and they are basically signing all the top prospects in the world of boxing. Your Canelo Alvarez, your Terence Crawford, your Naoya Inoue, your Usyk. The biggest names in the sport, let's just say, have all gone. They don't exist anymore, and fighters need to come through to replace them. Now, let's say that TKO owns all the cards. They have all those fighters under contract, even if they're just 2-year deals. There's a couple of things in here that are very, very interesting, and once you've got them under contract, it's easier to renegotiate. And if they do adjust their pay model for these big stars, and if they hold all the power like that, then there's a very real possibility that they could take over because no one else has any stars either. There's no stars at the top, and they've got all the development going on. Then there's a chance that they'll just I think focusing on youth is very strategic. Having them now means you may be able to hold them in the future. It's essentially like a farm system, a bit like in the UFC, where they bring them through, they develop them into stars, and then they hold them in, locked in. Now, the big question for me right now is this. It says minimum 2-year contracts, so minimum, could be longer. But what I don't know the answer to, and this is what UFC contracts often do, they include sunset clauses. And what it means is, if you turn down a fight or are inactive, your contract is paused, not expired. And the UFC also reserves the right to extend contracts after title fights or if fighters win a championship, which is a champion's clause, which means you can be locked into a contract for a very, very long time with the UFC. And there are clever things that you can do, and I'm sure Dana White knows this. You offer what seems like a fairly risk-free pathway into the big leagues in boxing, into financial stability, and then from there, you lock people in with litigation and rules and clever clauses. And I know it sounds all quite sinister, but that really is my biggest concern with this, about whether or not I think this can work. I think that, they could potentially take control of the sport. And, you might end up seeing big name fighters sitting out for quite a long time if they end up in a situation where they want to leave, they want to go and make a big fight, but they can't. And why would TKO just let these guys leave and go and join the big leagues in boxing? I can't imagine with the sums they're offering these guys that, anyone's going to want to stay. But also, they're big enough sums. I don't see it being a massively profitable endeavor, but I don't know that much about the numbers behind it. So maybe I'm completely wrong there. The other big thing here is I understand with the UFC that they own all the rights to the fighters' sponsorship deals and agreements and all that sort of thing. So they have to wear UFC clothing. They all have to wear Reebok or whatever the sponsors are. They all have to do that. They can't make their own money through sponsorships and things like that. So that is another reason why I don't think fighters would want to sign this if they're a big name. And a manager worth their salt really should try and retain those commercial rights for the fighters. So overall, how do I feel about this league? How do I think it's going to work? Do I think it will be successful? Do I think that it's going to come into a broken boxing system and fix everything? Well, firstly, I have to say that right now, boxing looks in great health, but that is because of the Saudi involvement and interest. If the Saudis disappear, it will go back to exactly the way it was, fractured, the biggest fights not being made, and everybody will be off doing their own thing again, hoping to sign the biggest talents to their books. But at the end of the day, everyone will do what is best for them in terms of financial incentive, and the fighters, the biggest name fighters, will hold the control. My personal feeling is that boxing is a little bit broken. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it could be a much, much better sport to watch if there was some kind of franchise model. I think if you had multiple franchise style teams and clubs like Matchroom, Queensberry, Top Rank, if they were actually franchises that had their own commercial deals, things like that, that were drawing in revenue, working under a bigger league, I think that would be amazing. But I think that this TKO thing is actually just a self-contained promotion right now, where each individual fighter is signed under them. And I just have this feeling that it's too restrictive. It's too restrictive. Given what we've got already, I just don't think you're ever going to see the biggest stars signed to them. And once they've built them into big enough stars, they'll look to try and leave. Now, the big worry that, as I've said in this video, is that those contracts are developed and designed so that those stars can't just leave once they're developed into those stars. But as it stands, with the current information that we have, not knowing if that's true, I just think that this is going to be a fantastic opportunity if you're a young fighter to go and put some guaranteed money in the bank and get your career off to a great start. Fight some fights you maybe wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. Get some promotion and some exposure that you maybe wouldn't have got otherwise. Make sure you're getting fights, fighting regularly. If you're someone with a dodgy style, if you're someone who's not knocking loads of people out, I think it's potentially a great opportunity to go and get a good start in the sport. And I think you could see some fantastic talents coming through as a result of it. And that is basically how I see it. That is exactly how I think it will work for now. But at some point that things will change. And also, Turki Al-Sheikh has this involvement. So even if you leave afterwards, it doesn't mean that you're away from them. Like Turkey might create like a follow-on league of megastars with uncapped earning potential with pay-per-views. Who knows? I mean, he kind of is doing that already, right? He's got so much control now and power because he's essentially bought his way into the sport. I always think the opportunity will be reserved for them to be able to make those big fights after they leave TKO. It might just be like a development, league where that happens. And we don't know what other contracts will have to be signed. As I understand, there's some kind of management company attached to it as well. So the other massive negative here, and I've just remembered I needed to talk about this in this video, and this is maybe one of the biggest points of contention of all, is that because I mentioned that it's going to be set up through a management company called Hualapay Ventures, but the fighters will be signed to the management company, not directly to TKO Boxing. So the management company will own TKO Boxing, but it will also have all the fighters signed, which means that the management company will also, the fighters will have the same promoter and the same management company working for them, which is a conflict of interest of the Muhammad Ali Act. So I'm just going to read you that here. So the Ali Act was created to protect boxers from exploitation and separate the roles of promoters and managers, which historically led to severe conflicts of interest. Key provisions relevant here. Section 17(1)(b)(1). A promoter cannot have a direct or indirect financial interest in the management of a boxer. Section 17.1(b)(2). A manager cannot have a financial interest in the promotion of the boxer unless disclosed and agreed to, and even then, only under strict limits. And thirdly, fighters must be informed about all revenues and expenses tied to their bouts, and no one entity can control both the fighter's contract and their fight schedule without full disclosure. If it's in the US, therefore, TKO's setup looks like a direct violation. While Pi Ventures is managing the fighter and promoting their bouts, then it violates the core of the Ali Act. If they're controlling matchmaking, rankings, and titles, and fighters have no freedom to negotiate externally, that is also a red flag. So how can they get around this? Well, they can hold events outside of the US, for example, in Saudi Arabia. And it is going to be it's a Saudi invested thing, so it would not be surprising to see that. And it gets around the Ali Act. And I think technically and legally, they could try and separate promoter and manager. So they may try to use legal shells. Huala Pi Ventures is the manager. TKO Boxing League is the promoter. TKO Group Holdings is the media rights holder. But if all are ultimately controlled by the same company, it's just a workaround and could still violate the spirit of the law. So that is the final thing here to say, really, is that Ali Act, the violation of the Ali Act potentially is another massive negative here. But all in, guys, I think that the league can be a very, very positive thing for boxing if it is what it currently is and stays as this sort of development thing that feeds into the main makeup of boxing. But ultimately, they're not going to get any big names right now. It's no chance. They're not going to get any big stars on board. And it remains to be seen how it will develop in the future. But, you know, I would be very, very surprised if they don't adapt the model as they take on those big names. Names that become big names. I would be very surprised if they don't adapt the model, because otherwise, you know, the difference with the UFC and boxing is in UFC, if you leave the UFC, where the hell do you go? Influencer fighting, maybe boxing. In boxing, if you leave this league, there's going to be plenty there on offer for you still. And that's that. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please bang a like on it. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Subscribe to a guy called Henry. As I always say, on to the next one.